The land was quiet that morning, too quiet for a region known for restless winds and wandering riders. The desert sun had barely climbed over the red cliffs when a lone Apache warrior, known among his people as Taza, spotted the trail of blood on the sand. It was thin at first, like a line drawn by an unsteady hand, but it stretched far across the dry earth, heading toward the pines that marked the northern hills. Taza slowed his own horse and listened, trusting the land the way he trusted his own breath. Something was wrong. Horses did not bleed without reason, and no horse wandered alone unless danger had touched it. A moment later he saw it, a dark stallion, trembling, wounded across the flank, dragging its reins as if begging someone to follow. The animal's coat carried dust from a long struggle, and its eyes held a fear that spoke louder than words. Taza dismounted without hesitation and approached with both caution and kindness. The horse lifted its head, recognizing him as no threat, and let out a weak breath. Its saddle was torn. A strap hung loose, sliced by a blade. Whoever sat on that saddle had not climbed down by choice. Taza placed a steady hand on the stallion's neck. The animal shivered, but did not pull away. Something inside Taza tightened. He knew the feel of a horse that had run miles to escape danger. This animal was searching for help, and out here in the wildlands, help was a rare thing. Taza whispered a few calming words in his tongue, earning a small nod from the stallion, as if it understood what came next. "Show me, brave one." The horse turned and started walking. Slow at first, then faster once it felt Taza at its side. They moved through the rocky path, stepping past broken branches and deep prints that told him the rider had fought hard. The air smelled of dust, pine, and something else he did not like, a faint smoke that did not come from any cooking fire. He scanned the land with narrowed eyes. Old American ranchers rarely lived this deep in the hills, and cabins were spread far apart, hidden among the trees. If a fight had taken place here, no one would have heard the cries for help. After nearly an hour, the wounded stallion stopped. Its chest rose and fell in sharp motions, and its ears twitched as if unsure whether to go forward. Taza looked ahead. A small wooden cabin stood in the clearing, half hidden by tall pines. The roof was patched with old boards, and the front porch carried marks of weather and time. Smoke drifted from the chimney, thin and weak. Taza's hand instinctively moved to the handle of his blade. Something inside that cabin waited, and the horse's trembling warned him that the secret inside would not be simple. Taza moved with the quiet steps of a hunter. The horse stayed behind him, nudging his shoulder once, as if urging him to be brave. He approached the cabin slowly, studying the ground. A broken lantern lay near the porch. Beside it, a small cloth had been dropped, stained with something darker than dirt. He bent down, touched it, and felt the rough weave. It belonged to a woman or a young one, not a grown warrior. His heart pressed harder against his ribs. Whoever had been here was not safe. He knocked once, firm but calm. No answer. He listened. Only the creak of the trees. He tried the door. It opened without resistance. Inside, the cabin held a heavy silence. Dust floated in the dim morning light. A table had been overturned. A blanket lay crumpled near the hearth. But what froze Taza in his tracks was not the mess or the silence. It was the movement in the far corner, small and shaky, like someone too scared to breathe. Taza's hand tightened around his blade. He stepped inside, closing the door gently so the sound would not startle whoever hid there. His eyes adjusted to the darkness little by little. The air was thick with the scent of pine wood and fear. A chair lay broken on the floor as if someone had used it to defend themselves. The wall near the window had a long scrape from something heavy or sharp. This cabin had seen a struggle, and not a small one. He took one slow breath and walked toward the corner. Before he could speak, a soft cry escaped from the shadows. It was not the cry of a grown person. It was the fragile sound of a child who had been fighting to stay brave for too long. Taza lowered his weapon and knelt slowly, letting his voice calm the room. He said he meant no harm. He said he came because the wounded horse had led him here. The child hesitated, but lifted their head enough for the light to touch a frightened face streaked with dust and dried tears. Their clothes were torn, and their small hands clutched something tightly to their chest. Something wrapped in cloth and guarded with every bit of strength they had left. "Where is your mother, little one?" The child shook their head. They tried to speak, but fear kept the words tangled. Taza placed a hand over his heart, showing sincerity. Finally, the child loosened their grip just enough for him to see what they held. A wooden carving, shaped like a hawk, handmade, Apache craft. His breath stilled. Someone of his own people had been here. Someone had given this child protection or warning. But why would a child have something meant for warriors? Before he could ask more, the horse outside suddenly stomped and let out a sharp neigh. Taza stood and moved to the window. His body stiffened. Fresh tracks led around the cabin, tracks too new to be from before. Someone had circled the cabin while he was inside. Someone watched even now. The child rushed to him and tugged his arm, whispering that the men would come back, the ones who hurt the rider and chased the horse. They wanted something inside the cabin, something hidden. Taza turned toward the corner where the child had been. He noticed now that part of the floorboard had been lifted, revealing a small hidden compartment. Whatever was inside that compartment had drawn dangerous men here. But the child guarded it as if it meant life itself. Taza crouched beside the loose board. The child hesitated but nodded, allowing him to look. He lifted the plank and saw a small wrapped bundle tucked deep under the floor. He reached for it, expecting maybe letters or coins. But when he unfolded the top corner, what he saw made his breath stop, as if the air had turned to stone. This secret was not just surprising. It was powerful enough to change what happened in these hills. It was something meant to be protected at any cost. Something worth chasing, fighting, and hiding from men with dark intentions. The child backed away, fear rising again. Outside, the horse gave another warning sound. Footsteps crunched through the brush, slow and steady, like a predator closing in on its prey. Taza covered the bundle again, but the shock held tight in his chest. He had not expected this. No warrior would have. He rose to his feet, blade ready, heart steady, mind racing. Someone was approaching the cabin, and they were close enough to hear a heartbeat. And now they knew the Apache warrior had found the hidden secret. The door creaked, and Taza understood. The real danger had only just begun. The door groaned, as the shadow on the other side shifted its weight, listening for movement. Taza stood still, letting his breath settle until even the child's shaky breaths faded into the quiet. The ground beneath his feet felt tight, as if the cabin itself held its own fear. The stallion outside gave a low rumble, warning him again that danger pressed close. Taza placed one hand behind him, guiding the child to stay low, waited for whatever came next. A soft rustle of branches brushed against the wooden wall. Taza's grip on his blade tightened. Whoever approached had skill. Their footsteps were paced, careful, almost too careful for someone searching blindly. This meant they knew the cabin, knew someone was inside, and planned to confront whoever had discovered the hidden bundle. Taza listened for the pattern. The rhythm of the steps, but the sound faded, replaced by the quiet hum of wind. Sliding through the trees, for a moment nothing moved, then a single knock hit the door, not frantic, not rushed, but firm and deliberate. Taza did not answer. He studied the door, waiting for a second knock. Instead, a man's voice carried through the wood, steady and full of false calm. He asked if anyone needed help. He said he had seen a wounded horse, said he came to offer aid. Taza knew lies when he heard them. This voice did not belong to someone offering kindness. It belonged to someone scouting his enemy. He stayed silent. The man outside chuckled softly and stepped off the porch. His boots scraped the ground, then circled toward the window. Taza moved quietly and shifted his position just enough to stand between the child and the glass. Through the thin curtain he saw a shape, tall and broad-shouldered, dressed in dark clothing that blended with the shade. The man glanced inside, but the poor lighting shielded Taza and the child from being seen. The stranger spoke again, his tone sharp now. He warned the person inside to come out. He said the riders would be here soon, and once they arrived, no mercy would be left to give. Taza heard the child gasp softly. He motioned for silence and waited until the stranger's boots crunched farther away. When the sound faded, the child finally whispered, asking if the man outside was the one who hurt their mother's companion. Taza asked what they meant, and the child explained in scattered words that their mother left the cabin days earlier with a man who promised to return with supplies. They said the man did not return, and not long after, riders arrived and searched the cabin. Taza looked back toward the floorboard hiding the bundle. Whatever lay inside that cloth was valuable enough to send armed men into the hills. He needed answers, and the child was the only one who held even a piece of them. He knelt down, smoothing the child's hair with a steady hand. He asked for their name, and the child told him. The name was small, but carried strength. They explained how their mother, a woman named Lorian, built this cabin with her own hands after fleeing a ranch caught in a bitter feud. She carried her child alone through the valleys until she reached these hills, where she found peace until strangers began lurking near her land. Taza listened with care. Stories of lone mothers in the wild lands were not rare, but the presence of Apache craft inside the cabin changed the meaning of everything. The hawk carving was made by someone of his people. It was not a toy. It was a symbol of protection and warning meant for times of danger. The fact that Lorian had this meant someone trusted her or owed her a great debt. The child said a warrior had visited once, a man with a scar across his cheek and a quiet voice. He left the hawk carving behind and told Lorian that trouble followed him and might reach her cabin someday. No one had seen him since. Before Taza could ask more, the stallion outside stomped again. The sound was sharper, urgent. Taza rose and peered through the window, scanning the trees. Another rider entered the clearing. His horse was small and quick, trained for scouting. The rider wore the same kind of coat as the first stranger. This one carried a rifle strapped across his back. He rode slowly, circling the cabin as if checking every angle before making a move. Taza understood that they were searching for the hidden bundle. The riders must know it still remained inside this cabin. If they captured the child, they would tear the cabin apart until they found it. Taza looked at the child's frightened eyes and realized he had stepped into a war he did not yet understand. But he would not abandon a child in danger. The second rider slowed near the porch and dismounted. He ran his hand over the wounded stallion's reins, studying the blood trails on its flank. The stallion lowered its ears and tossed its head, trying to warn him away, but the man only smirked and stepped closer. He placed a hand on the stallion's injured side, examining the gash as if trying to understand how far the animal had run. Then he leaned in, whispering something the horse clearly hated, because the stallion snapped its teeth, "Zflucht," and jerked away. That small sound was enough to push the rider's suspicion toward the door. He grabbed his rifle and approached the porch. Taza backed away from the window, knowing the stranger was seconds from trying to enter. He grabbed a wooden chair, wedged it under the door handle, and told the child to stay behind the table. The child obeyed, clutching the wooden hawk tightly. The rider pushed the door. The wood rattled, but the chair held. He pushed harder. Taza stood still, blade ready, studying the door for any sign of weakness. The rider cursed under his breath and stepped away. He called out to the first stranger, shouting that someone barricaded the cabin. Taza heard the reply echo through the trees, telling him to break the window if needed. The child's breath trembled. Taza leaned close and whispered reassurance. He said the hills had always protected the brave, and today they would protect the child too. He needed time to think, time to understand why these riders hunted so fiercely. He returned to the corner and lifted the floorboard again. The child hesitated but nodded for him to look. He uncovered the bundle and unwrapped it just enough to reveal the contents. Inside lay a piece of parchment marked with symbols of both Apache and settler origins. Something that looked like a map, but not of land alone. It held markings that pointed to water routes, mineral veins, and trade paths that ran beneath the hills. But the center of the parchment held something else, something that made Taz's heart jolt. A mark of his tribe's elders. If this map reached the wrong hands, the land his people protected would fall to men who wanted to strip it for wealth. That explained everything. It explained the wounded horse, the missing rider, the scarred warrior who had warned Lorien, and the dangerous interests of the strangers outside. This map was not just a secret. It was a key, and those seeking it were willing to spill blood for it. Taza wrapped the bundle again and placed it under his vest. He knew he could not leave it in the cabin. He turned toward the child and promised to find Lorien if she still lived. He said he would not let harm fall upon them, no matter who approached that door. The child stared at him with wide eyes, trusting him more than fear allowed. Before Taza could speak again, the window glass cracked. A heavy boot struck the frame from outside. The rider intended to break into the cabin. Taz stepped in front of the child and lifted his blade. His breath slowed. His heart steadied. He had walked into this cabin by chance, led only by a wounded stallion, but now the fate of a family and the protection of his tribe pressed on his shoulders. The window groaned under another. Strike the cabin walls shook, and Taza prepared himself for the moment when danger would burst through the door, bringing the truth, the fight, and the secret into the open. The window frame splintered under the force of another kick, and Taza positioned himself between the breaking wood and the child. Light seeped through the cracks, carrying dust into the air. The stallion outside neighed sharply, warning again that the riders were ready to strike. Taza steadied his breath and waited. Knowing the first breach would come fast, the rider outside struck once more, harder, and the glass finally shattered. A gloved hand pushed through the opening, reaching for the latch. Before the stranger could pull it, Taza lunged forward and slammed the edge of the window frame with his blade hilt. The rider cursed and jerked his hand away. A small trail of blood streaked the broken wood. The man backed off enough for Taza to catch a glimpse of his face. Hard eyes. A cold smirk. A man used to taking what he wanted. The rider barked orders to someone hidden behind the pines. Taza did not know how many surrounded the cabin, but he heard enough to know they were not leaving until the hidden map was found. He lifted the child into his arms and placed them behind the overturned table again, instructing them to stay low. The child nodded, clutching the wooden hawk like a shield. Outside hooves pounded the dirt as more men arrived. Their voices mixed, forming a low hum of threat. One man announced that the leader would come soon. Taza knew what that meant. Whoever led them was the true danger, and the moment that man stepped into the clearing, the fight would change. Taza pressed a hand against the small bundle hidden under his vest. The map grew heavier by the moment. As if aware of the storm gathering around it, he moved toward the back of the cabin and checked the rear wall. It held no window and only one narrow escape door that looked like it had been nailed shut for years. He tried the handle, but the wood stayed stubborn. He glanced back at the child, who whispered that their mother had closed that door long ago because the hinges were weak. Taza traced the edge with his fingers. He could break it if he needed to, but breaking it now would reveal their escape too soon. The riders outside were restless. A man near the porch shouted that they should burn the cabin. Another insisted they wait. Another said the map was too valuable to risk ruining. Their voices rose, blending with the wind. Taza listened carefully, piecing their intentions together. These men were not simple bandits. They had a purpose, and they worked with the kind of coordination that came from someone giving strict orders. The child tugged at his vest and whispered that their mother had warned them about a man with a silver badge, a man who claimed to be a lawman but acted like the leader of raiders. His name carried weight, and the child's voice trembled as they spoke it. Taza asked how many men followed him, and the child said, "Many. Too many for one cabin? It's too many for a lone Apache warrior to face without a plan?" Taza's thoughts shifted to the scarred Apache warrior the child mentioned earlier. The one who once visited Lorien and left her the hawk carving. That man must have crossed paths with the raiders and learned their intentions. If he left the carving behind, it was because he knew Lorien would soon be caught in danger. But why did he not return? What fate had met him? Taza wondered if the wounded horse outside had once belonged to that warrior. The stallion's saddle bore Apache craft, not settler design. If that was true, then the man who rode it had risked his life to bring the map here. A sudden thud against the door pulled Taza out of his thoughts. One of the riders had begun hammering the wood with something heavy. The chair under the handle shook, but held. Taza tightened his grip on his blade. He knew he must choose carefully. If he fought now, he risked exposing the child. If he waited too long, the riders might break through in full force. Outside, voices fell quiet for a moment, as if someone had arrived who silenced them without needing to speak. Then a slow set of footsteps approached the porch. Each step carried an authority that set Taz's instincts on edge. The man outside did not need to shout. His presence alone changed the air. The child's eyes widened. They whispered that the man with the silver badge had arrived. Taza moved toward the door and listened. The leader spoke in a smooth voice, saying he came for something that belonged to him. He said the cabin held a secret place directly under his command. He announced that whoever guarded it would face consequences. His tone held no rush, only certainty. Then he knocked once, just as the first stranger had. But this knock held a weight that settled deep inside the cabin. Taza did not respond. The man stepped closer, speaking through the wood, telling whoever was inside that he had given them a chance to open the door willingly. He warned that the next moment would not be as gentle. The child trembled. Taza pressed a hand on their shoulder and whispered that he would protect them. But he also knew that this leader would not walk away until he held the map in his hands. The land routes, the water lines, the mineral paths, all of it would make him powerful enough to control the region. If the Apache elders had marked this map, then it was meant to be kept safe from men like him. Taza heard the leader instruct his men to surround the cabin more tightly. Boots shuffled through the brush. Horses moved into a tighter ring. The leader spoke again, saying he knew someone was inside because the wounded stallion's tracks led straight to the door. He said the rider of that stallion had gone missing, and he intended to find out who last saw him alive. The child pulled closer to Taza, whispering that the man with the silver badge never came alone. He always brought someone strong, someone who moved like a shadow. They described a tall man dressed in wolf gray, wearing a bandana across his face. People in the hills called him Shade Rider. Some claimed he had no voice. Others said he did not speak because he preferred silence over mercy. Taza had heard stories of such a man, though none pleasant. If the Shade Rider was with them, then escape would grow even harder. Taza glanced toward the rear door again. Maybe it was the only way out. Maybe the weak hinges were a blessing. But if he broke it too early, the riders might hear. The leader outside grew impatient. The tone of his voice sharpened. He summoned Shade Rider by name, telling him to break the window and drag out whoever was inside. Taza felt a chill. He had to move before that man reached the window. He lifted the child into his arms again, carrying them toward the back of the cabin. He whispered that they must stay quiet. The child nodded, holding the hawk carving close. As Taza approached the old door, he tested the hinges one more time. They creaked, but held. He could break them with one strong strike. Then he heard a different sound behind him. The window near the hearth cracked, but not from a boot. The crack came from something sharper, something thrown. A thin blade pierced the frame and stuck there, vibrating. It was a warning, not an attack. Shade Rider announced his arrival without speaking a word. Taza moved faster, shifting his blade to his other hand, guiding the child behind him. The leader outside chuckled, saying Shade Rider never missed. He told him to break the frame fully on the next throw. Taza knew he had seconds. He braced his shoulder against the rear door, ready to break through. But before he pushed, he turned back for one final glance at the cabin that had drawn him into a conflict he had not sought. The map under his vest seemed to burn against his skin. He understood its value now more than ever. It represented power, land, safety, and danger for both settlers and Apache families. Another blade struck the window frame. Taza pushed against the old door. The wood cracked. The outside riders rushed toward the sound. The leader shouted for Shade Rider to cut off the escape. Taza broke through the door and pulled the child into the trees. The real chase had begun, and every shadow in the hills now carried threat and meaning. Branches whipped past as Taza carried the child through the narrow path behind the cabin. The cold morning air cut across his face, but he did not slow. Behind him, the shouts of the raiders rose sharply as they realized someone had escaped. Horses kicked up dirt. Men yelled orders. Shade Rider's quiet presence pressed through the noise like a warning that danger had already begun closing in. Taza guided the child deeper into the trees, listening to every rustle and shift in the ground. The hills were wide, but the riders knew the land well. They hunted often in these parts, and their horses knew how to track even the faintest trail. The map hidden under Taza's vest weighed heavy as he ran. It felt less like parchment and more like destiny placed in his hands. The child clung to him tightly, breath trembling, eyes scanning the dark forest. Taza whispered that they must stay strong. He told them the land favored the brave. They nodded and held the wooden hawk close to their chest. Taza stopped when he reached a fallen log near an old stream. The water ran slow, shallow, but it could hide their tracks for a short distance. He lowered the child into the water and guided them across, stepping lightly to mask their footprints. Beyond the stream, the ground lifted into a steep rise. If they climbed it fast enough, the raiders would lose sight of their direction. A sharp whistle cut through the trees. One of the riders had spotted their escape route. Taza turned in time to see the glint of steel between the branches. A man stood atop a boulder, rifle aimed downward. Before he fired, Taza grabbed the child and rolled behind a tree as the bullet struck bark. The ground shook from the impact. More riders arrived at the stream. Horses splashed into the water, hooves stirring mud. Voices echoed, arguing about which direction the pair had gone. Shade Rider did not speak, but his presence silenced the men. They waited for him to step forward. He knelt at the water's edge, studying the flow with quiet calculation. Taza held his breath, pressing the child close. Shade Rider touched the mud with 2 fingers. He looked up the slope without hesitation. He had their direction. Taya lifted the child again and began climbing the rocky rise. The hill was steep and the earth loose, but he moved with the strength of someone carrying purpose, not just a child. The child whispered that they recognized this hill. Their mother had once climbed it when she needed safety. At the top, the land opened into a grove of tall oaks with a hidden trail leading to a hunting post. Taza asked how far it was. The child said not far. That hope gave him a burst of speed. Behind them, Shade Rider whistled once, signaling his men. The raiders spread out like wolves, circling prey. Taza could hear the crackle of branches as they climbed the slope. He climbed faster, boots scraping rock, heart pounding in his ears. The child wrapped their arms around his neck, trying not to slow him down. He reached the top of the rise and ducked behind a thick oak. The clearing ahead was just wide enough for a small campsite. Taza laid the child down gently and scanned the trees. He needed to buy time. He needed to understand why the raiders chased so fiercely. He needed to find Lorien before the raiders did. But first, he needed to protect the child. He unwrapped a corner of the bundle hidden under his vest. The map glowed faintly in the sunlight, cutting through the branches. Apache markings, settler routes, minerals, water paths. Everything dangerous in the wrong hands. Taza studied the markings again. One symbol stood out. A circle with 2 lines crossing in the center. It was a sign used by Apache elders to indicate sacred land. Land not meant for mining or trade, but for preservation. If the raiders claimed it, entire families would be pushed from their homes. The sound of footsteps grew closer. Taza rewrapped the map and placed it against his chest again. The child whispered his name, asking if he had a plan. Before he could answer, a small noise came from the far side of the clearing. A figure stumbled from behind a tree and collapsed to the ground. Taza froze. The child gasped. It was a woman, dressed in a worn shawl, face streaked with dust, breath ragged from exhaustion. Her steps wavered as she pushed herself up with trembling hands. When her eyes met the child's, she reached out weakly. It was Laura. The child broke into a run. Arms wide, but Taza caught them quickly before they stepped out of cover. He scanned the trees, senses sharp. Lorien's arrival was too sudden, too quiet. He moved toward her slowly, blade ready, and asked if she was followed. Lorien shook her head, voice raw with fear. She said she ran through the ravine after hearing gunshots by the river. She said men chased her for 2 days. She said the riders wanted the map and would destroy anyone connected to it. When she saw Taz's blade and the child safe behind him, relief washed over her face. She told him she knew the moment she saw the wounded stallion that trouble had found them all. Taza helped her sit near the oak. Her breath was unsteady, but her spirit strong. She explained that the scarred Apache warrior who once visited her had trusted her with the map because he knew the raiders planned to seize Apache land. He begged her to hide it until he returned with help, but he never came back. Instead, men with rifles arrived. Men with silver badges that carried authority only in appearance, not in honesty. Before Lorien could say more, a branch snapped behind the slope. Shade Rider had reached the clearing. Taza signaled Lorien and the child to get behind a tree while he stepped forward, blade held ready. The silence that followed felt heavy. Shade Rider approached alone, trusting his men to surround the grove. His face was covered by his bandana, but his eyes were sharp, scanning every movement in the shadows. He studied Taza without drawing a weapon. For a brief moment, neither man moved. A quiet challenge passed between them, the kind carried by warriors who understood strength. Without needing words, finally the leader's voice echoed from the slope, telling Shade Rider that the map must be found before sunset. He ordered him to finish the chase. Shade Rider nodded once and stepped closer. Taza tightened his grip. The air felt ready to break. Shade Rider drew a small blade from his belt. It flashed as he tested its weight, then he pointed it toward grove behind Taza, signaling that he knew Lorien and the child were hiding there. Taza stepped between him and the trees. Shade Rider tilted his head, studying him like a man watching a puzzle piece fall into place. He moved with the calm of someone who believed victory was already his. The raiders around the clearing began closing in. One rider pushed through the brush with a rope. Another held a lantern, as if preparing to burn the grove. The leader raised his rifle and shouted a warning to Taza, telling him to surrender the map or watch the land suffer. Taza felt the heat of pressure rising around him. He had fought many battles, but this one carried more weight. If he failed now, the map would fall into hands that wanted to carve the land into something greedy-driven. If he fought too soon, he might lose the child and Lorien. He pressed his hand to the map under his vest and stepped toward Shade Rider. The ground felt heavy beneath his feet. The raiders stood ready. Horses snorted with impatience. Lorien held the child tightly behind the oak, whispering courage. Every sound in the grove seemed to pause, waiting for the first strike. Shade Rider lifted his blade. Taza raised his. The wind stopped. The leader aimed his rifle. Lorien covered the child's eyes, and in that breathless moment, everything in the land, the hills, the sky, and the earth itself seemed to lean toward the coming clash. The next step would decide who lived and who fell. The grove held its breath as Taza and Shade Rider faced one another. The leader's rifle never wavered. Horses pawed at the dirt with restless hooves. Lorien clutched her child tight, whispering courage even as fear pressed hard against her ribs. Taza felt the weight of his people, the hopes of Lorien, and the future of the land in the single beat before everything broke. Shade Rider moved first, silent as a shadow, swinging his blade in a sweeping arc, meant to disarm. Taza met the strike, steel ringing through the grove. The sound shook the birds from the branches. Shade Rider stepped forward with the force of a man trained to end battles quickly. His second strike carried more weight, but Taza blocked it and drove him back with a powerful shove. The raiders around them tightened their circle. The leader shouted for Shade Rider to take the Apache warrior alive. Shade Rider ignored him and lunged again, his movements sharp and focused. Taza countered each blow, stepping with precision, his shoulders steady like the warriors who trained him long ago. Every swing of Shade Rider's blade told a story of a man who fought without heart, bound only to orders. Every block from Taza carried the soul of someone fighting for more than his own life. A sudden shout broke through the clash when Lorien threw a stone toward the leader. It struck his shoulder, knocking his aim off balance. His rifle jerked, firing into a tree instead of toward Taza. The raiders scrambled, yelling threats at her. Out. Lorien stood firm, shielding her child with her own body. Taza seized the moment. He broke through Shade Rider's guard and knocked the blade from his hand. The metal spun into the dirt. Shade Rider froze. For the first time, uncertainty flickered in his eyes. Taza pointed his blade at him and warned him to step back. Shade. Rider hesitated, then slowly raised his empty hands and retreated a few steps. He looked past Taza toward Lorien and the child. Something in their trembling forms softened the sharp cold in his eyes. He lowered his head, as if acknowledging a truth that had been buried inside him for too long. The leader cursed loudly and lifted his rifle again, ordering his men to charge. But before they could rush forward, the wounded stallion burst into the clearing. The strong animal, despite its injury, reared high and struck the ground with a force that startled the raiders. Its wild cry echoed across the hills. Horses scattered, riders losing control for just a moment, but that moment was enough. Taza seized Shade Rider by the arm and pulled him clear from the path as the stallion charged through. The leader's horse bucked, knocking him to the ground. His rifle fell from his grip. The men tried to regain order, but their leader's fall split their confidence. Some hesitated. Some backed away. Others called out in panic as the stallion circled them. Forcing them to retreat from the grove, Shade Rider stepped away from the chaos, watching the raiders scramble. Then he turned to Taza and spoke for the first time, his voice low and rough. He said he never wanted this. Said he followed orders because he owed a debt to the leader. But that debt ended the moment he saw the child risking everything to protect their home. He said he would not fight for greed any longer. Taza studied him. Shade Rider lowered his gaze, removing the bandana from his face. His scarred jaw and hardened eyes told a story of a man who had wandered too long in the dark. He said he would lead the remaining raiders away, giving Taza, Lorien, and the child time to escape. Taza nodded, granting him that chance at redemption. The leader rose from the ground, shouting Shade Rider's name in fury. He demanded he return to the fight. Shade Rider did not obey. Instead, he faced the leader and told him the truth. The land was not his to own. The map was not his to steal. People of the hills deserved more than a tyrant claiming power through fear. Before the leader could strike him, several raiders stepped between them. They dropped their weapons, refusing to continue. The leader's face twisted with sudden fear as he realized he stood alone. He reached for his rifle again, but Taza stepped forward and kicked it away. Taza warned him that he would not allow him to harm these hills again. Lorien stepped beside Taza, holding the child close. The leader looked at the three of them, at the Apache warrior, the brave mother, the child who hid the sacred map, and understood his defeat. He fled into the trees, leaving behind the remnants of the men who once followed him. Shade Rider led the rest north, telling them to return to their own lands and never lay claim to Apache roots again. The grove quieted as the raiders disappeared into the distance. When silence returned, Lorien sank to her knees, tears of relief falling freely. The child ran into her arms. Taza placed a hand over his heart, grateful they had survived what could have ended in tragedy. Lorien thanked him with trembling words, saying she would have been lost without his strength. Taza shook his head gently and said they all played their part. The land itself had helped them, guiding the stallion, guiding the truth, guiding the courage they needed to stand together. They buried the leader's rifle beneath stones as a symbol that fear would no longer rule this land. Then Taza carried the map from his vest and knelt beside Lorien and the child. He told them the map belonged with the Apache elders, not in the hands of men who wished to carve the hills for greed. Lorien agreed and said she would walk with them to deliver it. The child held the wooden hawk and offered it back to Taza, but he placed it gently in their hands. He told them it belonged with the brave. Together they traveled through the valley, past the river bend and into the shaded mountains where the Apache tribe lived. The elders welcomed Lorien and the child with kindness after hearing their story. They praised Taza for his loyalty and courage. The eldest among them placed a protective mark on the child's wrist, a sign that the hills recognized their bravery. Lorien asked if she and her child could remain near the Apache land, at least until they rebuilt their lives. The elders welcomed them warmly. Taza helped them build a new cabin near the river, one safer and stronger than the one they lost. The wounded stallions stayed with them too, healed by the tribe's healers and loyal to Lorien's family. As the weeks passed, peace returned to the hills. The raiders scattered, their leader gone. Shade Rider became a quiet protector of distant valleys, watching from afar to make sure no threat returned. Taza visited Lorian and her child often, helping with the cabin, bringing supplies, teaching the child old Apache stories and survival paths. The bond between them grew. Lorian found comfort in Taza's steady presence. Taza found warmth in the family he had helped protect. The child's laughter filled the valley each morning. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the cliffs and painted the sky in warm colors, Lorian stepped beside Taza by the river. She thanked him again, not only for saving their lives, but for giving them a future. Taza touched her hand gently and said the land had brought them together for a reason. The child joined them, holding the wooden hawk between small hands. They placed it in Taza's palms and said it was time for him to keep it. Taza smiled softly and accepted the gift. The river flowed steady beside them, whispering promises of new beginnings. And in that quiet valley, under the warm glow of the fading sun, the Apache warrior, the mother, and the child began a peaceful life, bound by courage, trust, and the land that had brought them together. Their story settled into the hills like a lasting echo, reminding every rider, every traveler, and every wandering soul that hope can rise even in the most dangerous places, and that courage can build a home where fear once tried to take it away.